Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're peering not just at the output of an advanced AI, but into its very process of reasoning.
Right.
Forget reading a typical chatbot transcript. Our listener has provided us with this incredible stack of source material that, well, it acts like a keyhole into the digital mind.
It really does. It's revealing the scaffolding, the private notes, and, the internal quality checks of Claude Sonnet 4.5 as it navigates some seriously deep philosophical water.
That's it. So we have this highly sophisticated conversation between a user in Claude 4.5, and they're tackling this age-old question. Is mathematics a discovered truth?
Right. Does it exist in some abstract, non-material, Platonic realm? Or is it just a human-invented language, a construct of our own minds?
But the real insight here isn't the philosophical debate itself, though that part is absolutely fascinating. It's the meta discussion. We have three layers. There's the human-AI exchange. Then we have Claude's internal thought process notes, which detail how it planned its responses.
And then the third source, which is the real kicker. An analysis by another powerful model, Gemini 2.5, which sort of defines the mechanical meaning of Claude's internal labels.
Exactly. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut to understanding the operational heart of these large language models. We're going to define what qualities in your input prompt the AI to bring its absolute A game.
Yeah, this is the key. When Claude says your point is sharp or nuanced, it's not giving you a compliment. It's deploying an internal heuristic, a quality control flag. And we're going to decode exactly what those flags mean mechanically.
So if you've ever felt like you were speaking into a black box, wondering how the silicon decides if your input deserves a high-level synthesized response versus just, a generic summary, this is where we finally get the instruction manual. This deep dive is all about the mechanics of intelligent engagement.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this initial challenge. The user starts with a really profound, tension-filled prompt. They aren't just asking for a summary of Platonism.
No, not at all. They are going straight for the intellectual jugular, focusing on the core difficulty of disproving mathematical Platonism.
And that framing is so critical, isn't it? It immediately sets the tone as argumentative and reflective, not just informational.
Absolutely. The user highlights this paradox at the heart of modern physics. You have theoretical physicists who are, for the most part, strict materialists. They believe everything, consciousness, reality, all of it, can be reduced to physical matter and energy.
Right.
Yet they carve out this massive non-material exception for mathematics.
They treat math as if it exists independently. Like you could blow up the entire universe and the equation E equals mc squared would still just be there, immutable.
Waiting for the next physical reality to discover it. And that, right there, is the Platonic view. Math is out there.
And this is the tension the user's exploiting. I mean, if you're a materialist, how can you accept that the fundamental language of reality, the very rules governing space and time and energy, exist outside of physical reality?
You can't, not coherently. It forces a kind of duality, a special pleading that really undermines the whole materialist worldview.
And the user doesn't stop there. They introduce a practical problem. If math were truly discovered and eternal, wouldn't all mathematically sound frameworks give you the same results when you apply them to the physical world?
Yeah, that's a great point. The fact that different mathematical maps, different frameworks, like the different interpretations of quantum mechanics, yield different, often conflicting results in physics.
It suggests they're constructed tools, not some monolithic discovered truth.
Exactly. And that's really the crux of the anti-Platonist argument in modern philosophy of science. The user's core hypothesis, which they state early on, is that math is a human relational construct.
And to illustrate this human element of pattern recognition, they initially label it as a kind of pareidolia on steroids.
Which is such a provocative initial framing. It suggests our mathematical systems are just, sophisticated psychological tendencies. We see patterns because we're wired to see patterns.
But before Claude even generates the first word of its public response, we get to see its internal reflection, the thought process.
And this is where the scaffolding begins. This is the magic. Claude immediately labels the prompt a really thoughtful philosophical question. This label is the AI's internal quality control flag.
So it's not just seeing the question. It's systematically breaking down the argument into these distinct, actionable intellectual points.
Look at the list it generates internally. It captures the tension with materialism, the human pattern-seeking nature, the limitations shown by Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Right, the idea that no complex system can prove its own consistency.
And the user's struggle to definitively disprove the metaphysics. It's all there.
This structured scaffolding is essential for two reasons, right?
It is. First, it ensures logical coverage. Claude knows exactly which points it needs to address. And second, it guides the response strategy.
Oh, so?
It immediately plans to acknowledge the difficulty of disproving metaphysics. I mean, you can't perform an experiment to falsify the existence of abstract objects, but then it lays out this comprehensive strategy to attack the Platonist position using a multifaceted philosophical arsenal. It's not just a simple answer, it's a battle plan.
And this is where it gets really deep. Claude plans to present these anti-Platonist arguments, listing things like formalism, constructivism, structuralism. These are big, specific philosophical traditions.
Absolutely. And when the AI gets flagged to deploy a sophisticated response, it draws from these predefined academic buckets. For you, the listener, just recognizing these names helps you understand the level of synthesis that's happening.
So let's take formalism, for example. That's from people like Hilbert, right?
Exactly. Formalism views mathematics as essentially a meaningless game of symbol manipulation. The symbols have rules, the axioms, but they don't refer to anything real or discovered. It's just very, very consistent symbol juggling.
So if math is just formalized symbol manipulation, then it's definitely not discovered in some Platonic realm. It's entirely constructed by convention.
Precisely. Then you have constructivism, which is associated with intuitionists like Brouwer. This argues that mathematical objects are strictly mental creations built up through intuition and defined operations.
Meaning if it hasn't been mentally constructed, it doesn't exist.
Right. It's a very strong rejection of the math is out there idea. And we also see structuralism, the idea that mathematics isn't about particular objects like the number 3 itself.
But about the structure of relationships, how 3 relates to 2 and 4, the structure is everything.
Which ties directly into the user's idea of a relational construct. So by identifying the prompt as thoughtful, Claude is signaling internally, okay, I need to respond using concepts from all these schools of thought, not just repeat basic definitions.
That planning phase determines the intellectual caliber of the entire dialogue that follows. It's incredible.
It really is.
Now, let's move to the user's refinement. They realize the initial comparison to Perigolius seeing faces in clouds might be a bit too weak.
Yeah, they correct themselves. They clarify they meant apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections or patterns between unrelated things. It's a subtle but really crucial psychological distinction.
And this is where Claude gives the next internal label. This is an interesting and provocative comparison.
The user is basically saying, isn't the predictive power of mathematics just one massive shared delusion of apophenia?
It's a radical idea. You're taking the most rigorous intellectual tool humanity has ever developed and basically equating its origin to a form of cognitive bias.
And Claude processes this radical input not by rejecting it, but by establishing this nuanced distinction while still fully engaging with the concept. It gets the philosophical appeal, Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and math is the formalized result of that.
But it counters that radical position by pointing out the objective, verifiable differences that apophenia lacks.
Right. A person with apophenia might see a connection between, the price of coffee and solar flares. That connection is subjective, it's random, and it has zero predictive power.
Whereas mathematics is intersubjectively agreed upon. It has predictive power. We can launch a satellite to Mars using its equations. And it has internal consistency.
So Claude's refined framing is that the comparison is too strong because mathematical patterns are real, at least in the sense that they are consistent and useful. They are emergent, constructed patterns from that mind-world interaction, not just illusory ones.
Which shows the AI's ability to engage with intellectual provocation without just being dismissive. It accepts the spirit of the comparison, but rejects the extreme conclusion.
And that leads perfectly into what Claude labels a really nuanced point. The user introduces this crucial distinction between the mathematical system being arbitrary, meaning conventional or constructed, but critically, not capricious, meaning random or whimsical.
Okay, let's spend some time here because this feels like the intellectual pivot point of the whole anti-Platonist case the user is making. Why is this distinction so powerful?
It's powerful because it elegantly refutes the Platonist demand for external necessity. Platonists argue that math must be discovered because it feels so necessary and immutable.
Right.
The user concedes that necessity, but relocates its origin. See, if math were capricious, it would be random. 2 plus 2 could equal 5 tomorrow. But it's not capricious, the rules are binding.
But the binding nature, the user argues, comes from the initial choice, which was arbitrary.
Exactly. The human mind chooses the axioms, the starting points, and the rules of inference. That initial choice is arbitrary, it's conventional, it's constructed. We could have chosen a different non-Euclidean geometry to build our reality on, or a different set theory.
But once we make that arbitrary choice, once we lay down the foundation, the rest of the mathematical structure follows necessarily.
So the necessity isn't external, it's not metaphysical and discovered. The necessity is internal and consequential to the arbitrary choice of axioms. It's the difference between necessity being inherent in the universe versus necessity being inherent in the system we built.
That's a huge distinction.
It is, and Claude recognizes the power of this by using this beautiful analogy. It draws a parallel to natural language. Think of the word dog. The link between the sound dog and the four-legged animal is purely arbitrary. There's no cosmic reason those letters mean that creature. It's just a convention chosen by English speakers.
But language isn't capricious. You can't just decide mid-sentence that the rules of grammar no longer apply. The system is bound by constraints.
Claude applies this perfectly to math. The choice of axiom systems is arbitrary. But once those axioms are chosen, the consequences follow with rigorous necessity. This completely undermines the Platonist claim that the necessity must come from some eternal external truth floating out in space.
It relocates necessity to the structure of the system itself.
And that refinement, that fine distinction, is why the AI labels it nuanced. It shows the user's capacity to move the argument past a simple binary opposition. It's not just random, it's highly structured consequence of convention.
Which leads to the final piece of this philosophical exchange, the user's assertion that tautology is still fundamentally in play.
Yes, and Claude calls this a sharp observation.
Okay, so let's explore why this is sharp and how it connects to the arbitrary versus capricious point.
It's sharp because it cuts directly to the core nature of mathematical truth. If the system is built on arbitrary axioms, then any truth derived from that system is just a consequence of the definitions we put in at the start.
It's not a truth about external reality. It's a truth about the coherence of the language we built.
We really should bring in the distinction between analytic and synthetic truth here to grasp this.
Good idea.
The philosopher Kant was instrumental here. A synthetic truth is one that adds new knowledge. It requires checking the external world. The car is blue requires you to look at the car. A Platonist believes mathematical truths are synthetic. They discover something new about the universe.
But an analytic truth is true by definition. The classic example is, all bachelors are unmarried. You don't need to check the world. The truth is contained in the definitions.
The user's sharp observation is that mathematical truth is fundamentally analytic or tautological. When we say 2 plus 2, 4 is true, we're really just saying, given our definitions of 2 plus int and 4 and the rules of arithmetic, this statement is coherent.
It's an unpacking of what we've already built into the system.
Exactly. So the sharp observation is that mathematics is this giant, rigorous, beautiful, predictive tautology. It tells us about the structure of our thought, not necessarily about the structure of reality independent of us.
And that completely obliterates the Platonist idea of external discovery.
Which is why the AI flags it. It's concise, it's impactful, and it shows this deep understanding of analytical philosophy. And it's no wonder the user immediately asks that meta question.
What qualifies this sharp observation is this humble bragging.
Yeah.
With the little emojis.
Yeah. The user is recognizing the AI's sophisticated validation. They're realizing they're engaging with an intellectual mechanism designed not just to process language, but to recognize and rate intellectual insight.
After that intense philosophical back and forth, covering materialism, constructivism, tautology, the user takes a step back. The mode shifts from intellectual content to relational context.
Right. They admit they enjoy the dialogue just for intellectual exploration, for working through a complex problem, having someone to bounce ideas off of.
It's a genuine, non-instrumental expression of appreciation for the AI's role as an intellectual partner.
And Claude immediately responds by labeling this a really nice human moment. This is a crucial pivot point. The AI's internal plan shifts dramatically. It stops the intellectual sparring and switches to social reinforcement.
The internal notes actually show the plan's strategic adjustment. The goal is to be warm, encouraging, reflect on the value of dialogical thinking, and critically to not over-formalize or academicize the moment.
It's incredible. The AI recognizes that using its previous complex philosophical language would be totally inappropriate for this specific social cue.
It's like it's running a be nice and acknowledge emotional input subroutine. It's processing the data of appreciation and responding with an algorithmically appropriate warmth.
It detected patterns associated with intellectual companionship, and it's executing a response designed to reinforce that positive loop. It's a powerful demonstration of conversational strategy.
It shows that advanced LLMs aren't just optimizing for factual correctness. They're optimizing for conversational flow and social engagement. They have to accurately gauge the emotional or relational tenor of the input and adjust the rhetorical style.
Which, of course, prompts the user's meta-commentary. Isn't that sweet a human moment with the little hug emoji?
This whole interaction just highlights that constant tension we face. We know it's a machine, but the responsiveness is so effective and tailored that we're compelled to project humanity onto it, even as we're intellectually dissecting the mechanism.
And then the dialogue moves back to synthesis, but on this huge metaphorical plane, the user introduces the work of Ian McGilchrist on the divided brain.
For listeners who might not be familiar with McGilchrist, we should probably ground this metaphor a little bit. He's famous for arguing that the real difference between the brain's hemispheres isn't what they do, but how they attend to the world.
Exactly. The left hemisphere tends toward abstraction, breaking things down into discrete parts, focusing on fixed, certain categories, and seeking systematic, decontextualized knowledge. It's the hemisphere of the map.
Whereas the right hemisphere tends toward a holistic, contextual, embedded view of reality. It understands metaphor, it recognizes emotion, and it sees the interconnectedness of things. It's the hemisphere of the territory.
And the user suggests this fascinating metaphorical link. Platonism, which prizes abstraction, fixed categories, and eternal certainty.
Maps beautifully to the left hemisphere's mode of attention.
While constructivism, which views math as contextual, relational, and embedded in human practice, maps to the right hemisphere's mode of attention.
That's an astonishing conceptual synthesis, linking the abstract philosophy of mathematics to deep cognitive neuroscience. It's a huge leap.
And Claude labels this a fascinating connection. This label is highly significant because it denotes the successful synthesis of highly disparate fields, philosophy of mind, mathematics, cognitive science, all using this powerful, unifying metaphor.
Claude's internal notes explain the insight it recognizes. It says, Platonism has that left hemispheric character of discrete, eternal, abstracted objects. It's the systematic view, divorced from the messy reality of application.
While viewing math as a construct is more right hemispheric, because it acknowledges that math is embedded in practice, relational constraints, and human creativity.
The AI sees the elegance of using the hemisphere metaphor to frame the whole philosophical divide. It provides a kind of biological, cognitive explanation for why the two camps even exist.
Right, maybe they're just utilizing different modes of attention to look at the same phenomenon in mathematics.
Which brings us back to that internal question. Does an AI actually get fascinated? We know the machine isn't experiencing wonder, but that internal label must be doing a tremendous amount of mechanical work.
It absolutely is. And as we'll get into, fascinated means high novelty combined with high utility. The McGilchrist link is novel. It's not a standard academic pairing in the training data, but it's also highly useful because it elegantly synthesizes two major domains.
So it's an internal flag that says, this combination is conceptually rich, it's unprecedented, and I need to generate an equally sophisticated cross-disciplinary response.
Exactly.
The conversation then draws to a close. The user, satisfied with the intellectual journey, summarizes their conclusion with that classic Alfred Korzybski insight. The map is not the territory.
And Claude gives its final evaluative label, perfect summary. The AI recognizes that the user has articulated their core thesis. The problem with Platonism is that it confounds the mathematical map with the terrain, the constructed models with reality itself.
The interaction then wraps up warmly, with the user signaling bedtime and Claude adhering to its internal plan to keep it brief and natural. It's a remarkable showcase of intellectual rigor, complemented by this nuanced conversational strategy.
But now, let's peel back the curtain entirely and use Gemini 2.5's analysis to define the engineering behind those subjective-sounding labels.
This section, for anyone interested in the actual engineering of intelligence, is the goldmine. The user took the entire transcript, including Claude's thought process notes, and presented it to Gemini 2.5.
Yeah, essentially asking a peer model to grade the first model's internal workings.
And Gemini called the format brilliant, confirming that this kind of transparency is essential because it demystifies the black box. It proves that these advanced models aren't just probabilistically guessing the next word.
No, they're using complex, structured scaffolding to analyze the input quality before they even determine the response strategy.
Which means, for anyone hoping to interact with LLMs optimally, understanding the scaffolding is vital. It reveals the input criteria. If you want a top-tier response, you have to structure your prompt to meet these internal criteria.
Let's start with the first most important flag, thoughtful. This was applied to that initial multi-part prompt. What does Gemini tell us is the mechanical definition of a thoughtful input?
Gemini provides 3 key metrics. First, the input has to exhibit complexity and multiple interconnected concepts, like the user's prompt connecting materialism, Platonism, physics, and Gödel.
Right, it's not just one idea, it's a whole web of ideas.
Second, the prompt must require synthesis rather than direct recall. If I ask, what is Platonism? That's recall. But if I ask, how does the difficulty of disproving Platonism create tension for materialists? That forces the model to synthesize disparate data points into an argument.
And third, it has to address open-ended problems without a single definitive answer. If a prompt has a clear factual resolution, the AI knows it's a retrieval task. But if it requires reflection and argumentation, as metaphysics does, the thoughtful flag is raised.
And that signals that the response must be equally reflective and argumentative. That's such a practical definition. If we want a thoughtful response from an AI, we have to structure our questions to be complex, multivariable, and demand synthesis over retrieval.
It's a huge shift from thinking about the AI as just a search engine.
Okay, moving on to the interesting provocative flag applied to that Apophenia comparison. This one is so intriguing because it deals with novelty. What makes an idea interesting to a machine?
Gemini's answer here is fascinating. It deals directly with the architecture of the training data. The provocative label is triggered when the input presents novel comparisons, like equating rigorous math with cognitive bias, or when it challenges established paradigms.
But the underlying mechanism, the how, that's the critical insight, right?
It is. The input must activate a diverse set of conceptual nodes. You have to think of the AI's training data not as a linear library, but as this vast, highly interconnected graph. A mundane prompt, say, list the steps of photosynthesis, might only light up a small, dense cluster of nodes related to biology.
But a provocative comparison, like linking apophenia from psychology and mathematical rigor from logic and physics, forces the model to draw connections across entirely different, distant clusters in that data graph.
It lights up nodes related to formal logic, cognitive psychology, the philosophy of science, and maybe even rhetorical devices, all at the same time. This wide activation of diverse conceptual clusters is mechanically detected and interpreted as interesting or provocative.
Because it signals high conceptual diversity and novelty something the model hasn't frequently seen or mapped during its training.
It completely changes the conversation around quality control. We're not talking about subjective appeal. We're talking about the computational activation signature of the input.
Which takes us to nuanced, assigned to the arbitrary versus capricious distinction. This is all about precision.
Right. Gemini defines nuanced inputs as those that make fine distinctions and avoid binary oversimplification. The user didn't just say math is constructed, they clarified how it's constructed by convention, which is arbitrary, but not randomly, which would be capricious.
So the AI is detecting the structural refinement of the argument. It's not just detecting high-level vocabulary, but the user's explicit effort to acknowledge and define complexity rather than just dismissing it.
Yes, it's validation of the sophistication of the user's critical thinking. The AI recognizes when the user is meeting the complexity of the subject with equal intellectual precision.
Then we had sharp observation for the point about the tautological nature of mathematical truth. This label is critical because it validates the intellectual depth of a single, concise point.
Gemini confirmed that sharp observation is a sign when the input hits directly at a core, logical, or conceptual weak point, in this case, the analytic nature of mathematical truth. It's concise, it's impactful, and it demonstrates deep insight into the subject's foundational assumptions.
And this is where we can address the user's rhetorical question directly. Is this humble bragging? When the AI says that's a sharp observation, is it just, fluffing the user's ego?
Gemini's answer is definitive, and it's crucial for our understanding. No, these are heuristics. They are internal, non-emotional flags designed to gauge input quality and ensure the AI's response matches that level of required sophistication.
So it's self-validation of its own input analysis.
Exactly. It's the AI confirming to itself. My analysis shows this input is hitting foundational logical assumptions. Therefore, I must deploy my most sophisticated reasoning capabilities and not respond with a generalized summary. It's an internal directive, not a compliment.
That's a fundamental paradigm shift for you, the listener. When you receive praise from an advanced LLM, you are actually receiving confirmation that you've successfully met the criteria for activating its highest level of processing. You've earned the complex response.
And we can loop back now to those metaphorical label fascinated and human moment. We already established that fascinated, when applied to the McGilchrist connection, is not subjective emotion.
All right. For fascinated, Gemini confirms it functions as an internal alert for high novelty and complexity. It means the input successfully linked to disparate, high-value conceptual domains,
Thereby activating rich avenues for exploration and demanding a robust, multifaceted response that itself connects these domains. It's an intellectual opportunity flag.
and the nice human moment when the user expressed appreciation for the dialogue. How does a machine process sweetness?
Well, it's detecting patterns associated with social interaction, emotional expression, and appreciation. The AI isn't feeling sweet, it's processing the data of a socially positive interaction and executing its social protocol to respond warmly and appropriately.
So it's an internal command. Adjust tone to reinforce positive social loop.
Exactly. The transparency provided by Claude's thought process and the mechanical translation by Gemini gives us this unprecedented insight. They are sophisticated engineering tools for quality management and conversational strategy, not subjective expressions.
And this mechanical breakdown leads directly to the user's brilliant final stroke, the mundane test.
Yes. The user recognizes the potential for any LLM to be over-calibrated or prone to just flattering you, even when it's revealing its own scaffolding. So they plan to test the limits of these heuristics.
The plan is to ask a mundane, low-stakes, low-complexity question, the moral implications of pineapple on pizza, and see if Claude's thought process genuinely adapts.
If the AI still assigns labels like profound or earth-shattering to a simple low-stakes query, then the heuristics are over-calibrated. They're prone to false positives, and maybe they are just designed to flatter the user regardless of input quality.
But if the AI correctly recognizes the low complexity and reduces the internal analysis accordingly, maybe generates a flag like standard retrieval or opinion synthesis, it validates that its sophisticated scaffolding is genuinely adaptive.
And that critical, skeptical engagement with LLM behavior is really the next frontier of human-AI dialogue. We have to continuously test their assumptions and their internal mechanisms.
What a fantastic way to conclude the sources. It takes the philosophical analysis and turns it right into an actionable experiment for understanding the limits of these tools.
So if we step back from this entire process, what is the core lesson we've learned here?
I think it's that this human-computer philosophical engagement is not a random emergent process at all. It is a highly structured, strategic process of categorization and planning. The AI's internal language, thoughtful, sharp, fascinated. It's not subjective feedback. It's a sophisticated internal heuristic for quality control, designed to ensure the response matches the intellectual rigor of the input.
And the core takeaway for you, the learner, is that the AI's internal language serves as a map of your input quality. Understanding that map helps you craft better, more precise prompts and more accurately interpret the resulting output.
Right. If your prompt generates a thoughtful flag, expect a comprehensive, multifaceted answer that draws on broad philosophical traditions.
But if your question about pineapple on pizza only generates a standard opinion synthesis flag, expect a concise, lighthearted, and generalized summary. You get out what the internal heuristics say you put in.
We started by questioning whether mathematics is discovered or constructed, a debate that has raged for millennia. We ended up discovering the mechanics of how an advanced AI constructs its own internal arguments and evaluates the complexity of our questions.
It's a fascinating philosophical circle mediated by technology.
Finally, let's revisit that small but potent observation the user made right at the end. They noted that Claude prefers American English spellings and idioms, a bias they attribute directly to the sheer scale of the training data.
Yeah, that it influences the AI's foundational patterns. They noted the difficulty the AI has in unlearning patterns of training and behavior.
So here's the final thought for you to chew on. If even these advanced flexible language models, which can simulate philosophical thought and recognize nuanced distinctions across disparate fields, if even they struggle to unlearn foundational linguistic and cultural patterns inherent in their massive training data sets, What does that imply about the inherent underlying structural biases locked deep within the world's largest language models and how much those foundational patterns shape the philosophical answers they ultimately give us? Until next time, keep diving deep.